I think the Montreal Canadiens absolutely make the most sense to me. McDavid needs to go to a team that is already up, still rising. I'd say the Habs are already like a contending team if you want to group them in that window, okay, or in that group. And they have all the assets to make this trade happen, and they wouldn't have to compromise their current roster too badly. I mean, we were talking about this, like, and I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on this potential trade package. I'm just going to say it. What if you trade like Demidov, Hage, Reinbacher, Fowler, and a first for McDavid? The Oilers get their goalie of the future. They get a potential star in Demidov, okay? And they get Reinbacher, who could be...
Minnesota Wild fans have waited long enough. Not just waited. Suffered through the same ending over and over again. Strong regular seasons. Dangerous moments. A roster that feels close. But every spring, the exact same weakness comes back to haunt them. No elite number one center. No unstoppable force in the middle of the ice capable of taking over an entire playoff series. And now, suddenly, one shocking prediction has the entire hockey world paying attention. During a recent appearance on the Pat McAfee show, ESPN's Erik Johnson made a statement that instantly sent NHL fans into debate mode. According to Johnson, within the next 3 years, either Auston Matthews or Connor McDavid could realistically end up wearing a Minnesota Wild jersey. Not as a joke. Not as clickbait. As a serious prediction. And the moment he said it, people started asking the same question. Could Minnesota actually pull this off? Why Minnesota still needs one more piece? The Wild already have so much of the difficult work finished. Their defensive structure is strong. Their goaltending pipeline is respected around the league. Their roster has speed, skill, and playoff-level physicality. And then there's Kirill Kaprizov. A player capable of changing a game in seconds. A player defenses genuinely fear. But even with all of that talent, the Wild still feel incomplete. Because when playoff hockey slows down and every shift becomes tighter, elite teams usually have one thing Minnesota still lacks. A dominant center. Someone who controls the pace of a series. Someone who can create offense even when nothing is available. Someone opponents simply cannot contain. That's why this rumor refuses to disappear. Why Connor McDavid's future suddenly feels uncertain. Right now, Connor McDavid is still the face of the Edmonton Oilers. And officially, nothing has changed. He remains under contract through the 2026-27 season, and his deal includes a full no-movement clause. That means no trade happens unless McDavid personally approves it. So no, this is not something happening tomorrow. But the real tension begins after that. Because Edmonton keeps getting close. Deep playoff runs. Heartbreaking exits. Near misses that feel heavier every single season. And eventually, every superstar reaches the same crossroads. How long do you stay loyal if the championship never comes? That's the question quietly hanging over the Oilers organization right now. If Edmonton falls short again over the next 2 seasons, the pressure becomes enormous. And if McDavid reaches the final year of his contract without an extension signed, the Oilers could face the most terrifying possibility in hockey. Losing the best player in the world for nothing. Why Bill Guerin has been preparing for a massive move. This is where things start becoming genuinely interesting. Because Minnesota hasn't been behaving like a desperate franchise. Bill Guerin has stayed patient. His protected future draft picks. His avoided reckless trades. His continued building prospect depth instead of sacrificing everything for short-term fixes. Wild owner Craig Leopold even described the strategy perfectly. Keep the powder dry. In other words, stay ready. Because eventually, a transformational player becomes available. And when that moment arrives, you need the assets to strike immediately. That philosophy suddenly feels a lot more important now. Especially after Guerin recently admitted that nobody on the roster is untouchable. Nobody. That is not normal GM language. That's the kind of statement executives make when they're preparing for the possibility of something enormous. The trade package would be massive. A Connor McDavid trade would instantly become one of the biggest deals in NHL history. Minnesota would need to offer an extraordinary package. But surprisingly, they actually have the pieces. Jesper Wallstedt remains one of the league's most intriguing young goaltenders. Danila Yurov continues developing into a serious offensive talent. Charlie Stramel, Adam Benek, and Riley Heidt are all viewed as rising prospects with long-term upside. And then there are Minnesota's draft picks. The Wild still control important future first-round selections. That matters. Because if Edmonton ever opens the door to conversations, rebuilding around elite prospects and premium draft capital becomes unavoidable. Minnesota can offer both. And if Guerin decides to include a current roster star in the deal, suddenly this stops sounding impossible. Why McDavid could actually consider Minnesota? This might be the most important part of the entire discussion. Minnesota is no longer viewed as a rebuilding team. The foundation is already there. Kirill Kaprizov is locked into a long-term future. Brock Faber has become one of the NHL's most reliable young defensemen. Matt Boldy continues improving every season. And Quinn Hughes potentially joining the organization changes the entire ceiling of the franchise. This would not be McDavid arriving to save a broken team. This would be McDavid joining a roster that is already close to becoming a Stanley Cup favorite. And financially, the timing could actually work. By the summer of 2028, Minnesota is projected to have massive cap flexibility. Enough flexibility to chase the biggest player in hockey. A lineup featuring Kaprizov, McDavid, Hughes, Boldy, and Faber would instantly become one of the most terrifying cores in the NHL. That's not fantasy anymore. That's a legitimate championship blueprint. Final section. Right now, this entire conversation still depends on one thing. What happens in Edmonton? If the Oilers finally win the Stanley Cup, maybe none of this matters. Maybe McDavid signs another extension and stays in Alberta forever. But if the championship window closes without a title, everything changes. And if that moment arrives, Minnesota may be one of the few teams truly prepared to take advantage. The prospects, the cap space, the structure, the supporting cast, it's all quietly lining up. That's why this prediction refuses to disappear. Because for the first time in years, the idea of Connor McDavid wearing a Wild jersey no longer sounds completely impossible. And if it ever happens, the entire NHL changes overnight.